Can you imagine living a life like Jesus lived? Always hounded, always questioned, always attacked, always humiliated. And you know, most of us we can go to a certain extent. But in our emotional, spiritual lives, there is a cul-de-sac where we say, that's it. Very few people have that ability to give completely as Jesus Christ gave. Now, the goal of my sermon today is to say, let's try to do a little more, to take one more step to go a little bit farther. I'm sure that you remember Thelma and Louise, a couple of women who had a really difficult life. They faced humiliation, abuse, day after day. So one day they decided they were going to get away from it all and go on a vacation. And as they were on vacation, something tragic happened. Thelma was raped. Louise didn't have to think twice about what to do. She pulled a gun out, shot the rapist. And then in a moment of panic, they decided to flee the country. And along the way, they picked up a charming young man who actually robbed them of everything they had. The police officials were closing in on them. The choices were very limited. It was surrender and go back to God knows what, or die. And that movie was made back before we were quite so graphic. So all we see is the car going off a 2,000-foot cliff. But they made the decision to end it right there. How many times do we do the same thing? Individually or with our marriages or even as churches, just to say, that's as far as I can go. I want us to start with thinking about failure. It's something we all have in common, something we inherited in the gene pool. Don't you think it's interesting that the very first story that God tells in the Bible is the story of two people who failed? They couldn't blame it on circumstances, as we like to do. They couldn't blame it on peer pressure, as we like to do. They couldn't even blame it on their parents. But Adam and Eve started out with this one thing, this failure. And man, we certainly have carried on that family tradition. We so resemble our ancestors. We are like the children in Lord of the Flies, you know, when they're on this island and they are leaderless. And so they decide to take matters in their own hand, and it's really who can beat who up or who can beat who down. And I think God's timing is so absolutely perfect. The BP oil spill in the Gulf. One of our crowning moments. I mean, we came to this continent just a few hundred years ago. Our nation is only more than a couple of hundred years old. And yet, in that short period of history, we have managed to pollute the air and the streams and the forest. We have taken what was almost a Garden of Eden, and we have developed it into a nightmare. And I've watched individuals do the same thing with their lives. They just sort of get on this downward spiraling road. I've seen marriages where we enter this holy, sacred covenant with God. And I've seen so many couples stand right here and say, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, I will be faithful and loyal and true and love you. And then those couples will come to me and sit in my office and say, I can't take this anymore. Well, it's not just a convenience agreement. Marriage is a covenant with God. And yet, because of our link to that first story in the Bible, we have this unique ability to mess up a holy, sacred covenant with God. And then, of course, there's always those people. In school, we call them bullies. It's usually the big kid that gets your peanut butter sandwich or takes your Twinkie or your little cupcake filled with the ice. Because he's the biggest, he wins. He gets what he wants. There are human vultures in society who just prey on weaker, trusting, less equipped individuals. And I don't know if you've ever been near a vulture or not, but if you have had the pleasure of going to a zoo that actually has a vulture collection that you can get close to, those are the stinkingest animals you ever got near. They're covered with the rotten carcasses of what they've eaten, blood-drenched, and they just stink, as we would have said in Marlowe, to high heaven. Now, this is the world we live in, and this is exactly the kind of world that Jerusalem was experiencing. So in our passage today from Lamentations, the second chapter, we're going to look at 3 verses that all have to deal with public failure, and that's something we know a whole lot about because we have television, we have newspapers that are telling us about it every day. First issue, or first aspect of public failure that I want to cover in verse 15 is, what do others think? All who pass your way clap their hands at you. They scoff and shake their heads at the daughter of Jerusalem. Is that the city that was called the perfection of beauty, the joy of the whole earth? It's like looking at an ugly girl and saying, there she goes, Miss America. The sarcasm in their voice. And sarcasm is okay. It can be a good tool. But if you are hurting, you can't appreciate sarcasm directed your way. And Jerusalem was hurting. Their city was lying in rubble, the buildings. Their people were scattered all over the earth. Their children were dying. Their elders had faced disrespect. And what did people do? Boo, boo. Boos and hisses. It's like going to a football game and you watch the opposing team come in and the home crowd gets up, boo. But we're not talking about a football game. We're talking about real life. And deep down, there was something about each one of us that realizes that we're no different from Jerusalem. I am not amazed that we cannot get enough men to serve as deacons. I am not amazed that our children's department lacks workers. our nursery classes get combined. Because we are so afraid, not of failure, but of the reaction to others when we fail. Notice I said when we fail. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. We're all going to fail. And the thing that we think most about is how others will react. And the reaction is swift. People don't stop and think about logic or anything like that. It's like the other day when the stock market went down 900 points because of rioting in Greece. There was a worldwide reaction. And when we fail, we know that there will be a worldwide reaction. Whatever happens in your life, others will react.